I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today I am going to talk to y'all about The Rose of Sebastopol by Katharine McMahon. So this is a historical fiction about the Battle of Crimea in the 1800s. This was also during the time period of Florence Nightingale, the famous woman who basically made all of these advances to medicine and how we treat soldiers who are wounded on the front lines. And this is a very interesting historical fiction book in that we get this indirect view with Florence Nightingale and the work that she did, as well as the Battle of Crimea, in that it is with this character named Mariella. She's just kind of this outside person looking in, and ultimately thrusts herself into this place where she clearly does not belong, and she just has to go with it, hit the ground running, learn crash course, trial by fire sort of thing. And she does come in contact with Florence Nightingale and starts learning from her. It's very, very cool, y'all. So basically the premise is that Mariella is engaged to a man named Henry. The main characters are all British, and Mariella had spent her life living in London, and her fiancé, Henry, is sent to the front lines of Crimea to take care of all of these wounded soldiers. Mariella's cousin, Rosa, decides to run away and join Florence Nightingale and become one of the nurses on the front lines, because she's very much that kind of gal who's like, I can't just sit around and wear a pretty dress and get married and be useless. There are people dying and I want to help. That's the kind of gal Rosa is. So off she goes in the middle of the night and causes an uproar in the family, and nobody can get in touch with her and nobody knows where she is, and she's off doing her thing. And of course, Mariella is properly horrified. However, she then finds out through Henry and Rosa's letters that Henry is in trouble, that he falls ill while helping the soldiers on the front lines, and now Mariella feels this same compulsion that her cousin did, except for, of course, it's more concentrated, directed on her fiance, whom she loves very much. And so she then goes to the front lines in Crimea to see if she can find her fiance, make sure that he's still alive, and see how she can help. And it's kind of this like coming of age sort of story, in that it's pulling the veil off her eyes and seeing the world for what it is, and no longer being this pampered, privileged lady, and seeing the world for what it is, and seeing her place of privilege, and also seeing that so many of these things that she previously cared about, how insignificant and silly they are. So, for example, there's this part in the story where she is spending time with some of her relatives, and, it's kind of that thing where it's like, oh yeah, that's Auntie whoever, she's just kind of like that. But she sees it through this new lens of empathy and care that she has. There's a battle going on the front lines in Crimea, and people are sick and people are dying. And her aunt is very much a hypochondriac, where she thinks there's always something wrong with her, and oh, I'm so delicate and frail. And she just does this for attention. And this is the first time that Mariella realizes that her aunt is really just doing this for attention. She's not actually frail. None of her supposed health concerns are real. There's nothing wrong with her. She's just putting on, and oh, woe is me, and all that. And she gets really angry at her, and she's like, can you be so for real right now? Like, you can get up and go get a glass of water yourself. Like, quit acting like that. Like, holy crap, get a grip, lady. And, storms out, and the family is shocked, because this is really the turning point for Mariella, where she's never behaved like this before, and they're like, what is going on with this girl? And so seeing this journey she goes on to letting go of these old values and thoughts, and also having the scales fall from her eyes of seeing these relatives and people around her, seeing them for who they are, and seeing the good and the bad in people, is really fascinating. And then, of course, the action really picks up once she actually gets to the front lines and she sees the carnage of war for herself. I feel like this is a very important story because, honestly, prior to reading this, I really didn't know anything about Crimea or anything with that area, and I certainly didn't know about this particular war in the 1800s. No, this is way before the battle with Crimea and Russia in modern day happened, that I read this book way before that with Russia was a thing. Obviously, I when that happened with Crimea in the 2010s, I was like, oh, I remember that from that book that I read. And that's why I feel like it's so important to read these kind of historical fictions, in that it enables you to explore parts of history that you don't necessarily learn in school, or, maybe they're briefly touched upon and you don't really, get a handle of what exactly it was about or the impacts that it had. And Florence Nightingale is a name that a lot of people are familiar with, but I'm sure most people couldn't really point to anything specific about her other than, she was this famous nurse and she did a lot of cool stuff and she, furthered medicine and stuff. But it's like beyond the generic, what do we really know about her? And I feel like this book also does a really good job of really fleshing her out as a person and really highlighting the things that she did to help further medicine, as well as the things that she did for this particular war effort. So if you are a fan of Florence Nightingale, this is definitely the book for you. It definitely does do a really good chunk of service to Florence Nightingale, and it's definitely just an important piece about Crimea and about that particular snapshot of history in the 1800s. I love that it is told from the perspective of this young lady who is really coming into exploring the world around her and realizing her place of privilege, and ultimately choosing to abandon that privilege for doing the right thing, for fighting for the greater good. All of that. It's such a wonderful trope to follow in a story. I personally really enjoyed it. I will warn you, it is also a very sad story. There's a lot of death, there's a lot of loss. It's really sad. So do take that with a grain of salt when you read it. I don't want to have any spoilers for y'all, but yeah, definitely just take that with a grain of salt when reading this. That it is about an active war and being on the front lines, so a lot of loss, a lot of grief, a lot of carnage. Thankfully, it's not graphic, which I also enjoy because I do not like graphic descriptions of violence and war and things like that, but it definitely gives you the depth of the seriousness of the front lines and what's happening without getting into the gore and the nitty-gritty in that fashion for the shock value. So if you enjoy historical fiction that's not necessarily about the parts of history that we are just hit over the head with in school over and over and over again, this is definitely the book for you if you're looking to learn something new. So I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to give it a like. And if you're new, subscribe. All right, y'all, thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.